Oh man.
All right. Jamil, good morning. All right, if everybody will go ahead and mute your microphone and your video. I'm gonna get this part started over here. Good. Now, yesterday my Zoom was acting up just a little bit. I've for whatever reason I've lost the chat box. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you have a question or comment or anything as we go, if you'll just unmute your microphone and just like we're in class, just ask what you want to ask or say what you want to say when that time comes. That will be just fine. But just to avoid any feedback or background noise or anything, if you stay muted for now, I won't be able to see your chat screen, at least for the moment. I'm going to have to get, I got to get, I don't know, something. There's probably something I'm not doing in the background. I'll take care of that later. Register, 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 register. That's the only announcement for today. Registration for summer and fall is now upon us. Currently, it is registration for current students. I was wrong last week whenever I said new student registration would start this week. It's actually next week. 21st is when new student registration opens. I think originally it was 1 week of current student registration and then new student would open. But they've changed it, or I may have been wrong from the very beginning. It wouldn't be the first time. New student registration will open on the 21st, which is a week from today. So you have another week of registration time dedicated just to you if you have not looked into registration yet. For the summer, if you weren't already aware, the only courses that CAMI offers are the online courses. So product ID, restaurant industry, intro to hospitality, and I forgot. I think we have 4. Intro to hospitality, restaurant industry, product ID. I'll send a message out. I'll look it up and see. There are no lab classes offered during the summer. So keep that in mind as you work on your schedule. So this week we're going to talk about 2 things that are completely unrelated. It's both of these topics, both of these methods or things we need to cover in this class, part of our learning objectives. But one of these, smoking, can be very, very expensive if you don't already have a smoker or a grill. I'll show you some inexpensive ways to smoke. It can be expensive. The meats, the things that we generally put in a smoker can be expensive as well. Because of that, for this week, we're also going to talk about handmade pasta. And from an expense standpoint, that's the other end of the spectrum. Making pasta is nothing more than flour, egg, a little salt, and some oil. Maybe a little splash of water, depending on the recipe that you're going to use. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's talk about smoking. The demo that I recorded, I still have to caption, and we'll post in our week 12 Blackboard folder. I smoked, let's see, I smoked beef brisket. I smoked a small picnic pork shoulder. I smoked a whole chicken. And I cold smoked cheddar cheese 2 different ways. I'll kind of explain a little bit of that whole process now, but I go into a lot of detail in the demo. So look for that recording when I put it up. You'll cover in meat and seafood. Some of you are in or have already taken meat and seafood, but you'll cover, all of these primal cuts, and you can smoke all of that. You can smoke vegetables. You can really smoke anything, I guess. My personal smoking method or approach combines a lot of the country's barbecue influences. I'm not a disciple of Texas barbecue or Memphis barbecue or Kansas City barbecue or St. Louis barbecue or North Carolina or South Carolina or Alabama. All of these influence, I'm kind of an amalgamation of all of them. I like a sauce that is sweet and tangy and a little acidic and spicy. Not too thick, but not real runny. The only, of all the barbecue sauce in the world, the only one I'm not really much of a fan of is the mayonnaise based. I think that's one of the South Carolina methods. Originating really from Texas is the barbecue rub. Texas barbecue is more about the rub and the wood being used, and not so much about the sauce. And so I show you in the demo my rub, and you're free to do whatever it is that you want to do if you want to do some smoking for this week or next. I like mine to be, again, a little savory, a little sweet, a little spicy. I use smoked paprika, a little more expensive than plain sweet or Hungarian paprika. I use brown sugar. Brown sugar is white sugar and molasses already. Molasses is a pretty additional ingredient in good barbecue sauce. I use ground chipotle. I think I talked about that before in previous classes. I prefer the smokiness of the chipotle versus just plain heat. If all you want is heat, then traditionally you use cayenne, but I like the smokiness, so that's part of mine. The selections of wood are really limited by the types of wood that God put on the planet. Whether you're using whole chunk wood or the little sawdust or these pellets, it all comes from wood. Still today, the most prevalent smoking woods are hickory and mesquite. But apple wood is a close second or third, and is becoming more popular year after year. Oak is an up-and-coming smoking wood, where just a few years ago you wouldn't even consider oak. Pecan, any fruit wood, cherry is becoming more common. Every wood imparts its own character. Some are sweet. There's just different notes in each wood. You've got to experiment and find what you like. Here's a little bit of the science. We have to do a little bit of science. And we're not going to go into detail of all this mumbo jumbo and what hemicellulose and cellulose and where you carbon oxides and nitrogen oxides and where you're dehydrating the wood. But what I want to point out, what this is the burning stages, the combustion stages of wood. And at what temperature does the wood react in these certain ways? And so right on the edge, if you can see, of pyrolysis and what they're calling burning bush. That's where pyrolysis is where the wood is turned black, but it hasn't combusted. It hasn't caught flame. And this burning bush section, 700 to 1,000 degrees, that is the flame, the bright red and orange, really hot coals. So a majority of the heat is generated. Well, right on that line where you're generating the best flavored smoke, if that makes sense. I'll show you how to achieve that. The best way to achieve that is soaking the chunks or the pieces of wood that you're going to use for the smoking. You want to soak that. I do it overnight, at least a few hours, so that that wood will smolder. Right there in that 700, 800 degree range, that's the smoldering point. And that's what you want. You don't want your hickory to turn into flame if you can avoid it. It will eventually, because at 200 or 300 degrees, you're evaporating the water, so you're dehydrating the wood over time. Even that soaked wood is going to dehydrate and will eventually flame. But you get the best flavor when that wood is just smoldering. That's pretty important to know. Here's a little, you can look on the interwebs and you can find 1,000 different, and they'll all be if you're gonna smoke fish, well, these people say you should smoke fish with pecan or cherry or apple. And I guess that means you would avoid the others. If you're going to smoke a pig, pigs like all of it. If you're going to smoke vegetables, you should smoke vegetables with apple and cherry. I don't. Anytime you're dealing with flavor, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Good flavor is in the taste of the taster, I guess. So if you like hickory for everything, then you can smoke everything with hickory. There's no, you didn't. Good. So I'm showing here 4 different kind of heat sources. Okay. And so how these heat sources influence the flavor of whatever it is you're cooking. And so you can see the heating element really doesn't affect flavor at all. What does affect the flavor is the gases that heat source imparts, that gives off, that will become okay. Somebody, if you will, somebody's not muted their microphone. If you'll everybody mute your microphones, then we won't have radio. All right. There, I just helped you out. So an electric heating element just heats the air, and that in and of itself is not going to impart really any flavor at all. Gas really doesn't impart anything as well. It is anywhere you see this water where there's water being given off. It's in those vapors, in the water vapor. That's where the water vapor in the smoke adheres to, on a charcoal grill, for example, if you're grilling a steak or grilling a burger, that tastes so much different than cooking it on the, pan frying it, because of whatever little particles are still included in the water vapor. I hope that makes sense. Wood.
Chef,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Doug.
I've got an electric smoker though, and what that does is that heats up the wood chips with electronic heat source, and then that sends off the flavor to the meat.
It does. I'm not necessarily referring to it's. So if you used your electric smoker, and you omitted the wood, um, would be just the heat element that's doing the cooking, and the only flavor that would be imparted in whatever you have in that smoker would come from the creosote and the whatever impurities and particles are still in the box.
Chamber.
Right? It is the presence of that wood. So I'm not necessarily referring to just the primary heat source, but the whole picture, all of what is imparting heat. And in your case, Doug, you've got an electric heat element, which is heating. You see on the far left-hand side, the wood. That heat, as it dehydrates the wood, as it smolders, cooks the wood, that wood, in addition to some of these things up here that they say, whoever they is supposed to be, and it's, to be honest, only been found in lab rats, that some of these gases are carcinogenic. So if we look at the gases over the charcoal and the gases over the wood, obviously carbon monoxide is dangerous to us. Carbon dioxide is dangerous to us. But whatever these polymers and nitrogen oxides, these things can be cancer causing, at least in lab rats. The flavor is coming from the water vapor. Whatever is attached in that water vapor is deposited on your burger, on your brisket, on whatever it is, the chicken, whatever you're cooking. And so wood, whether it's in chunk form, whole log form, or all the way down into fine, tiny sawdust, will affect flavor and part flavor. All right, there we go. You're going to have this in the PowerPoint as well as this recorded presentation, but here's a really good little cheat sheet, I guess. The process for smoking, preparing, are you going to rub? Are you going to brine? Are you going to marinate? If you're going to smoke something, I would avoid marinades altogether. Maybe that's just personal choice, but you're going to cover everything up. Why marinate? Brining can be important, especially if it's a large chunk of meat, simply to add more liquid, more moisture, more juiciness into that cut of meat. Every once in a while, I like on a Thanksgiving, for example, I like to brine a whole turkey. A very simple brine. Brown sugar, salt, water. Brine a whole turkey for a week or so, and then mesquite smoke that turkey. If you don't brine the turkey, but then you smoke it, the size of that turkey and the amount of time it needs to be in the smoker to cook all the way, you'll dry it out without brining. And so in this case, for smoking, I use brining for moisture, for juiciness of the finished product, because smoking can be so drying. Some of the things we're pretty used to smoking, like a brisket, in a smoker, it's cooking low and slow, which tenderizes the meat a little bit, but we reserve as much of the fat as possible that's on that brisket, so that as it finishes, the fat renders into the meat fibers, keeping it juicy and not drying it out. I like this chart also because of this selection of wood types. And if you're not familiar with this, with smoking and doing this, you can see without having to experience and try to curate and acquire each of these woods, you can see what woods are really strong, what woods are subtle and mild flavor, and what type of flavor. Is it sweet? Is it fruity? Is it nutty? Is it strong? Is it citrus? Is it tangy? You can see that in this chart right here. And this chart suggests, it's just suggestion. There's no rule here that says you can't, it is illegal to smoke pork with maple wood. Well, that's dumb. It's not illegal at all. It's not. Suggested up here as well is smoking temperatures. And if any of you have a lot of experience or even a little experience smoking, you'll see some of these temperatures seem maybe a little bit on the high side. Some of that, notice fish, turkey, and chicken are smoked a little on the high side, up to 300 degrees. And the purpose of that, they're mild meats. They take on the smoke flavor really fast, and we don't want them to dry out. They dry out very fast also. So this is a nice little resource to have. You can smoke on anything. If you have a grill at home, any kind of grill, then you can smoke. I'll tell you later what the lab assignment is, but I'm giving you a couple of, I'm giving you an alternative. You can choose A or B. So you won't have to smoke this week if you can't get the product or don't have. I want you to understand, maybe adding to the science of smoking, how this works. And it's easiest to see in a kind of an old school chart of an offset box smoker. So these are those round or square grills that have a side box, and usually opposite that side box, it has a little smokestack. There's the fire box, that's the small box off to the side, and the cook box or the cook chamber. That's where you put the product that you're smoking. And so there's the air intake in the firebox and a hole in between the firebox and the cook chamber. And you build your fire in the firebox, and when you have good coals, you put your soaked hardwood, your hickory, your mesquite, your cherry, your apple, your pecan, your maple, whatever wood you're using. As that starts to smolder and starts to generate smoke, you close everything up, leaving the damper open so you have airflow. And not only do you have smoke, but you have heat from the firebox that heats up the cook chamber. And the heat slowly roasts the brisket, for example, while the smoke imparts flavor. You know, in the same way, if you've ever stood around a campfire and you've had the smoke blow on you, you're not cooking, but when that camping trip is over or that campfire is put out, you get in your car or you go home and you smell your clothes and it's in your hair, you have taken on the smell of whatever it is you were burning, whatever wood was in that fire. And so the same thing's happening to your brisket or your pork butt or your chicken or your turkey or your fish. I cold smoked cheese this week. I'll show you about that as well. But it all happens the same way. The challenge is controlling the heat, controlling temperature, because in the kind of smoker you have in front of you, which I used this week, I used a propane box smoker. I used, let's see, I showed you how to stovetop smoke, and I cold smoked 2 different ways. Cold smoking is easy. There's hardly any temperature that you're dealing with at all. Stovetop smoking is pretty close to pan frying or pan searing. And so that's high temperature. My propane box is very easy to regulate the temperature, but an open fire like this, it is pretty difficult to control temperature. And so you're constantly opening dampers, closing dampers, opening dampers, controlling the heat flow, the airflow, restricting airflow to bring the temperature down a little bit. The more airflow you have, the higher, the more you're feeding those coals, the higher the temperature goes. And so this is a stand smoker. Air comes from underneath. Your heat source generally is underneath, and you generate smoke, and smoke's the. Here's a if you have a char grill, if you have a gas grill, propane gas grill, this is how you can smoke using your gas grill. So you're gonna hold. Again, let's talk about a brisket. You're going to hold your brisket on the cold side of the grill. If you have a 2-burner grill or you have a 4-burner grill, then in this image, you have a 4-burner grill. Well, we're going to ignite 2 of the 4 burners all on one side. And on that side, that's where a water pan, again, because smoking can be so dehydrating, a water pan and your wood chips or your wood chunks are going to go over the ignited burners. They'll smoke, but the heat from those 2 burners with the lid closed, the heat will circulate in the whole griller, the whole cook chamber, the whole box. So the heat will roast the meat, but the smoke circulating as well. You'll have smoke billowing out from every open area, every crack and crevice of the grill. Don't freak out about that. But this is a way that you could smoke just on your propane grill, and it works quite nicely. Cold smoking, well, I'll talk about it for a minute. This is something really nice to experiment with, especially if you like. You can cold smoke fish. Some instances you should, but if you like smoked cheese, I do. You can't smoke cheese in the traditional smoker. You don't want the cheese to get above 90 degrees. Ambient temperature needs to be below 90 degrees. So in the summertime, you want to add to whatever smoking chamber, you want to add ice to keep the temperature of the whole box as low as possible. So here's a picture. What I want to point out is at the very bottom of the screen. Okay, that's a smoking tube. You can get these on Amazon. They're, I think, in the $15-20 range. It's a metal screen. You fill that with sawdust. You fill that with wood chips as small as possible, or pellets. Those pellets, you can't buy them at Walmart, I don't believe, not in Morrilton anyway. You would buy those pellets also from Amazon or some online source. This individual is smoking quite a bit of cheese in a traditional box smoker, but the heat, there really is no heat. By using this smoking tube, it's open on both ends, so a little air can pass through, causing the sawdust or the wood pellets to smolder. And so very, very little heat is generated, not so much that you're going to completely melt the cheese. Also, although you can see in the picture that white cheese on the left that's closest to the edge, it looks, several of those cheeses look pretty soft. At 80, 85, 90 degrees, cheese is really, really soft. But you want the cheese to go in the smoker at like room temperature. When cheese has reached that point where it's starting to give off a little bit of its oil, that's the best condition for the cheese to be smoked, and it's going to take on the characteristics and the flavor of that smoke that you impart. Now, here's the bad news with smoked cheese. I think here's another image right here. Summertime, especially around here in Arkansas, where we're nearing 100 degrees, or those 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of the year that we're even over 100 degrees. If you're going to smoke cheese in the summer, which is, you can do that, you need to add ice to whatever vessel it is that you're smoking in. Again, you've got to keep the temperature down to below 90 degrees. Not just the ambient temperature, it's the temperature of the cheese itself. So here's the bad news. If you really, really like, so if you make homemade bread, one of the best things to do is to take that homemade bread right out of the oven, and hot and fresh, slice the bread and eat it fresh right out of the oven. Make chocolate chip cookies. If you want to learn how to make chocolate chip cookies, you need to watch Tara's chocolate chip cookie video. She did a great, great job teaching us how to make chocolate chip cookies. One of the best things in the world is to take those chocolate chip cookies right out of the oven where they're still gooey and the chocolate is getting all over your face and your fingers. It's fresh. It's made right then. I want it right now. You can't do that with smoked cheese. If you pull cheese right out of the smoker and you slice it, you're going to taste bitter. You're going to taste chemical. And so smoked cheese is something that requires patience. You can't rush perfection. You can quote me on that. Write that down in all of your notes. I may ask for an essay on the final on that point. You cannot rush perfection. And perfectly smoked cheese is a 2-week process. In the smoker for an hour and a half, just getting as much of that smoke on the cheeses as you can. Then you wrap the cheese, put it in the refrigerator, come back in 2 weeks. If you want to experiment with this, I would encourage you to do this for yourself. You know, smoke some cheese today or tomorrow and taste it. But if you do that, smoke. So I smoke the little 8-ounce blocks of Kraft cheese. I like medium cheddar. And so get a cheese of your choice and cold smoke 3 or 4 blocks of cheese and date them. After they've been in the smoker for an hour, wrap them up, dated, and mark them 1, 2, 3, 4. Put them in the refrigerator. Or so if you do 4, eat 1 fresh out of the smoker, and then label them every, for every maybe 4 or 5 days, and you'll be amazed, without doing anything else, just that 1 hour in the smoker, how powerfully smoked the flavor will be of the cheese between fresh and 5 days, between 5 days and 10 days, between 10 days and 2 weeks. At 2 weeks, it's really reached all of it's ripened. It's reached all of the smokiness that it's going to achieve. And so here's a cold smoker, the parts and pieces and kind of the science or a little diagram of how this works. I show you in the video that I'll be putting up today. I did do it in a 5-gallon bucket, and I use a little cookie can as my hot box that generates smoke. I use an aquarium pump, the aquarium motor for an aerator, to ventilate and what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of blow the embers to keep them glowing, keep the smoke generated, as well as direct the smoke. And so the other day I did cheese in this 5-gallon bucket, no ice. If I do this in July or August, I put ice down in the bottom of the bucket. I show all that to you in the demo video. So let's talk a little bit about pasta. We're just going to switch gears over to pasta. So you don't have to have any fancy equipment. You don't have to have the roller. I'm going to put up some links. I'll put up a couple of YouTube videos. I put so much time and effort into the smoking video. I didn't make a handmade pasta one, not yet. And I want to give this to you as an option for this week. And so I think we may have addressed this before, the very first week when we did pasta. I think we did bow tie pasta, if you will recall. Farfalle is the word for the bow tie pasta, and we call it bow tie pasta, but farfalle means butterfly. Why we call it bow tie, I don't know. I wasn't part of that committee that decided that translation. But the most traditional pasta, ancient pasta, is egg and flour. And those are the egg noodles. There's also traditional pasta, depending on the area in Italy where you live, or where this pasta originates. Semolina flour and water is it. And so the names of the pasta refer to their shapes in Italian, and there are hundreds and hundreds. I'm posting a couple other videos relevant to specific shapes and how to make those shapes. You can do whatever you want. The process is simple. Flour, little salt, make a well, eggs, maybe some olive oil. Beat the eggs, gradually stirring in a little bit of flour as you mix the eggs until you can't use the fork anymore. Bring together all of the clumps and the dough, and then stretch and knead the dough. It should be denser than biscuits. It should be maybe a little bit, a little like bread dough, maybe on the dense side of bread dough, but it shouldn't be a brick either. It needs to rest. All fresh pasta needs to rest after it's been kneaded, generally about a half hour. It's to hydrate the flour. You don't have any water in there, and the only hydration is coming from what water exists in the egg. And so,
Chef,
yeah.
is it
Speak is your decision.
okay? I asked this question, Dan. More kneading equals tougher dough. Is that correct?
So the short answer is yes. You don't want to knead this so much like bread, like you're developing the gluten to cause a whole lot of strength and stability. That could render tougher pasta. If you want to ensure that you have the crunch of al dente pasta, the secret ingredient is semolina flour, and that's a little more of a specialty flour. I wouldn't encourage anybody. I'm certainly not going to require anybody to go out and buy semolina flour. The best pasta in the world is made with 00 or double aught flour. It's all-purpose wheat flour, bleached, processed, just like all-purpose flour. But the double aught is the size of the mesh when it's sifted. It is super, super, super ultra fine flour. So it makes a very supple dough, and it's not real dense. It hydrates quicker. I've got Walmart brand all-purpose flour here. I may do this today myself, even, because more we keep talking about pasta. Y'all know I like pasta, and it's very easy to make. But if I realize not everyone has done this, but those of you that have will really understand this. But if you haven't, you can still try to imagine. There is a difference in the density of homemade biscuit dough versus homemade bread dough. And you don't want to work biscuit dough at all, or as little as possible. The more you work the biscuit dough, the more gluten is developed and the denser your biscuits will be. If you want a nice, fluffy buttermilk biscuit, then you work that dough as little as possible. You really just bring it all together. Pasta is in between. And so some depends on the recipe you're using. And some depends on the taste, the crunch, the mouthfeel that you're after. Crunch is the wrong word. The al dente-ness that you're after for your pasta. What is the right amount of working? Trial and error. If you try handmade pasta this week and you've never made it before, you will be in for maybe a little bit of a surprise, regardless of what your expectations are and what you end up producing. Because there is a difference between fresh pasta and store-bought dry pasta. No matter what, you make the best, most perfect handmade fresh pasta, it's different than commercial dry pasta. The end result is going to be different. It cooks faster, and so it's worth toying with, and it's very inexpensive. Here's a little drop in the bucket of many different pastas. The farfalle is as simple as making strips, cutting those strips into rectangles, and then pinching each rectangle in the middle. Now you have your butterfly, or you have your bow tie. And so you have your rectangle, and if you squeeze the rectangle in the middle, well, I don't do that very well, but I think you get the idea. Playing with these filled and shaped, a tortellini, sacchetti. These are there's some method and there's a little bit of talent, not to the filling, but how they're folded and the shape that you get. Just a simple linguine, fettuccine, tagliatelle, pappardelle. You can roll out your pasta just with a rolling pin, a wine bottle, anything, a dowel. You can roll the pasta out. If you're going to do a cut pasta like that, you want to get the pasta. So the rule is you want to roll the pasta out thin enough that you can read the newspaper through it. Okay, that's pretty thin. Then you'll roll that like a cigar, and then cut it to whatever size, whatever size you want, and boil away. Heavily salted water. Okay. We'll come back to questions in just a minute. Let's talk about your lab assignment. Okay. And so this is A. Smoke something. Any method. Look at the demo. Review this PowerPoint. Look at the demo video that I put up, and smoke something in any method. I did stovetop smoking, but I did it outside because I don't have a vent in our kitchen here that works really, really nice, especially if I'm going to generate that much smoke. So I did it outside on the burner on my propane, my gas grill. So I kept the smoke outside. You could do the same thing. Those disposable aluminum pans are perfect for this. Check out that little video, and if you are able and have the interest in smoke something, you will definitely be smoking. I know for sure in Food 4, Chef Rogers really, really likes that. You may do that in garde manger. You will do barbecue sauce in stock soups and sauces if you haven't had that class already. No matter who teaches that class, it's kind of a fun part of the class. We all add the barbecue sauce competition day to stock soups and sauces. So this is not going to be your first experience with smoking, barbecuing, dealing with this kind of stuff. We've been talking about presentation. Now this is the presentation of a section of pork belly. It appears to be just the meaty, or the picture's not doing this justice. This is high-end plate presentation. This is from a Michelin star winning restaurant. And so we're not going to break down all the components and what this is, but I want you to just visually, we can review just a little bit. There is vegetable, there is starch, very little bit, but there's vegetable, there's starch, there's protein, there's sauce, and it's a complete meal. And this is high-end plating. Now, some of you may look at that plate and say, where's all the food? I don't, there's not enough food there to feed me. Well, go back to your healthy foods and nutrition, and we shouldn't be eating, as much as we do in a single sitting, but we have to learn, regardless of what our personal tastes may be, we have to learn to get to this kind of maybe minimalist type of plating. Negative space is our friend. Leaving empty space on the plate draws your eye to one particular place. Okay. This is alternative lab A. Make some handmade pasta. If you don't have the supplies, if you can't afford it right now, if you don't feel it's safe to get out, whatever the case may be, if it's not practical for you to smoke some meat this week, then 3 or 4 eggs and a couple of cups of flour, teaspoon or 2 of salt, and maybe a tablespoon or 2 of olive oil, and you have handmade pasta. And so if you're going to do pasta, I would encourage you to make any kind of make or shape of pasta, but make it a meal. So we've done in class before the pandemic, we've done several things, a few different sauce methods that would work very well for a sauce over pasta. And so you're free to do any other kind of research as well. Come up with any sauce, any shape of pasta, whether you add vegetable to, or you grill some chicken or roast something. If you're going to do pasta, I'm interested in seeing pasta and sauce. Okay. It doesn't have to be a full meal. And technically, if you're going to smoke a meat, I'm most interested in seeing what you smoke and how you did with that. But either way, I'm still interested in seeing some plating. With pasta, pasta and sauce is just fine. I want you to think more of your plating than just plopping pasta and dumping a meat tomato sauce on top of it. Give it some thought and some height as you do that. Your lab assignment B is as it has been all along under this format. I want to see you in uniform with your production from the week. I hope that's pretty straightforward. I'm going to see if I can get the box up.